I'm with Roy Thurley, and he's here on the Balfour Centenary Tour. Roy, you've been leading this tour. How has the tour been?
It's been a fantastic tour. We've had so many highlights of this tour, right from the very beginning, which is now nearly 2 weeks ago, right the way through to today, where here we are in the Garden Tomb. We began at the Western Wall. The beginning of our tour, first couple of days, we went down to the Western Wall, and we wanted to do that to signify that God is in this whole thing, to do with the Balfour Declaration and the rebirth of the State of Israel. And how now, towards the end of the tour, we're here in the Garden Tomb, because it's all about the return of Jesus to the place where he should be.
And you've been here while it actually has been the centenary of the Balfour Declaration.
Absolutely. Now, the Balfour Declaration itself was agreed by the British War Cabinet on the 31st of October 1917. Most people look at the Balfour Declaration, they read it, and it's dated the 2nd of November. Absolutely right. But that was 2 days after the Cabinet itself agreed the text of the Declaration. And it's a very significant date. 31st of October, in any case, is Reformation Day. So it was the 400th anniversary of the Reformation. But not only that, on the 31st of October, it was also the Battle of Bethsheva here in the land of Israel, called Palestine at that point. And I find it utterly amazing that here we have a group of 10 people in the war cabinet, the majority of whom are evangelical Christians with an understanding of God's purposes for the Jewish people in returning to their land. They are deciding the text of this letter. But that letter itself would have had no value whatsoever unless we could actually, Britain could do something about it. They needed feet on the ground in the land in order to bring about the rebirth of the Jewish state within the land of Palestine. And at the very same day, actually at almost the same hour, the Battle of Bethsheva was completed. And that gave Britain and its allies a foothold in Palestine as the Ottoman Turks were removed from the land. But that battle by itself would have just have been another battle in a war unless we knew what we were going to do with the land afterwards. And what we did with the land afterwards was the Balfour Declaration. So here you've got both of them had to happen at the same time. And they did. And that wasn't arranged by man. But I know somebody who did arrange it, because God wanted his people back in his land. And he had been working for years to bring this about by working within the evangelical church in Britain, giving them the understanding that as you look at the scriptures, you can see that they should be back in their land, working on that and bringing it all together at the same time. I find it utterly amazing. You can read the stories, and if you can't see God in that, you must be utterly blind.
So was the Battle of Bethsheva the start of British Mandate?
The Battle of Bethsheva enabled the British Mandate. It wasn't actually the start of it. And initially, after the Battle of Bethsheva, obviously that was only one town. The Egyptian Expeditionary Force, is what it was called, became the Palestinian Expeditionary Force. That moved up through the land, came to Jerusalem, which was liberated from Ottoman rule on the 11th of December 1917, beginning of Hanukkah, and then up through the rest of Galilee and the rest of the land. So that all happened, and then the land was under British military administration initially. Now, when the war ended, 1918, there was obviously a peace conference, and that peace conference was there to decide what do we do with all this land which we have now captured from the Germans and the Turks. So the Paris Peace Conference convened, and they concluded what should be done with all the lands in Europe. They didn't have time to talk about the Ottoman Empire. So another conference was convened in San Remo, 1920, when the Ottoman Empire was discussed and what happens to the Ottoman Empire. And at that conference, there were Arab nations that were set up at that point, but there were also mandates given to Britain and to France for other areas of land, and the mandates were there to bring the people, the indigenous people of the land, to the point where they could have self-government. So it wasn't colonization, it was bringing the people to self-government. And France was given Syria, Lebanon, Britain was given Mesopotamia, now Iraq, and also Palestine. For Palestine, it wasn't just for the indigenous people there, it was specifically set up as a homeland for Jewish people worldwide. So the expectation was that the Jewish people would be flocking back to their land and would, once they became sufficient numbers, be able to run their own affairs, which of course is what happened. Because the Jewish people did come back to the land. Okay, there was opposition from the British at times to it, but eventually they were able to declare their own state 30 years later.
So the Balfour Declaration was the open door to the Jews to enter British Mandate Palestine?
Effectively, yes, that's right. The Balfour Declaration was that open door, and in fact was incorporated into the Mandate for Palestine. So the actual text of the Balfour Declaration is there in the preamble to the Mandate, which means that instead of it just being a letter from Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, it became part of international law.
Now, there's been a call for Palestinians have been calling that Britain should apologise for the Balfour Declaration. What would you say to that?
I don't think we've got anything to apologise for. I think actually we were doing the will of God in doing it, because he wants his people back in his land. But the Balfour Declaration not only enabled the Jewish people to come back, it also preserved the rights of the Arabs, which they had never had under the Ottoman Empire. So it did a great deal of good for the Arabs of the area as well. Now, the mandate actually talks about the Arabs aren't mentioned by name within the mandate for Palestine. It just talks about the other peoples in the land. It doesn't talk about Arabs. So it includes also, the Greeks and the Russians and goodness who was here. But their civil and religious rights were preserved within the British mandate for Palestine. Their political rights weren't. But then political rights were granted to Arabs in the other lands where Jews weren't given political rights. So you got to see the whole thing as a group. That there were 5 countries basically that was set up out of all this, and the Jews only get one of those, which is Palestine, now called Israel. The other 4. Which is Syria, Lebanon, Mesopotamia, Iraq, and the other part of Palestine, which is now called Jordan. They're all Arab ones, and the Jews aren't allowed there. So you had to see the whole thing as a big picture. You can't just look at this and say it's terrible what happened in Palestine, because there's all these other ones, and Britain actually gave away 3/4 of the land of Palestine, which it was administering, to the Arabs to set up their own place there, which was then called Transjordan, is now Jordan. So they got out of it far, far more than they would have got out of it in any other way. There's nothing to apologise for.
Now, you've been to Bethsheva, and there's been celebrations up there. Tell us what's been happening up there.
Wow, that was a fantastic time actually, because 31st of October 1917 was a major event. The Expeditionary Force had tried to break the Ottoman lines twice already by attacking Gaza City, and on both occasions had been defeated. And as a result of that, a new general was sent out from Britain, General Allenby, to take charge and to try something new. Now, when he got out here, he discovered that General Chetwode, who'd been in charge while there was an absence, he'd come up with a plan, which was to attack Bethsheva. Now, this was absolutely revolutionary. Nobody in attacking the land had ever come in that way before. To come in through Bethsheva, they'd always come in up the coast through Gaza. But it was totally revolutionary. But General Allenby liked it. He said, "Yeah, let's go for this." Now, what they did was they made sure that the Ottomans believed that they were going to attack Gaza for a third time. So they had the ships offshore, and they left all their munitions in place and everything like that. But in the meantime, a lot of the troops went round the outskirts and came up towards Beersheba. And in the Battle of Beersheba, it started on the morning of the 31st of October with British forces taking their objectives in the south and the west of the city. And then the New Zealanders came in and took Tel El Saba, that's the old the Bethsheva from Abraham's time. They took that because that was a gun emplacement. And then finally, in the late afternoon, the Australian Light Horse did a charge across the fields and eventually took the city. Now, that was such an amazing thing to happen, because the Australian Light Horse, a light horse regiment, is not a cavalry regiment. The whole idea of having the horses is that you can get to the front line quicker than walking and running. So you get to the front line where you're going to be, and then you jump off your horse and you start firing your rifles. That's what the light horse is supposed to do. That's what they're trained to do. General Chetwode said, "Carry on galloping." So there's these Turks. They know that this is a light horse regiment, so they're all sitting there waiting for them to jump off their horses and start firing so they can fire back. But they don't stop. They carry on, and they're going so fast that the heavier infantry, the armaments, they can't get the range. By the time they've worked out the range and fired it, they've all gone past that. It's all landing behind them. So the horsemen just carried on galloping across the field, jumping over the trenches that were occupied by the Ottoman Turks. And when they got over the trenches, some of them dismounted and start firing at the trenches from behind. Well, of course, they're not defended from behind. That's not what a trench is for. So they were able to attack the Turks from behind. The remainder of them carried on galloping into the town because they knew that the one thing they had to capture were the wells. If they did not capture the wells, they had no water. If they had no water, they died. It was as simple as that. So they had to capture the wells before they were destroyed. And in fact, they found a German engineer just about to blow up one of the wells when they got in there, and were able to stop him from doing that. So it was an amazing victory. It's really huge for the Australians and New Zealanders, because it was a major victory that they took part in. New Zealanders had their mounted rifles had taken Tel El Saba, so it's huge for them. Unfortunately for Britain, it's hardly mentioned. We were involved in some major battles during the First World War. Think of Passchendaele and these other ones that we've been remembering recently. And Bethsheva is a footnote. And yet its significance, because it's the road to Jerusalem and the liberation of Palestine from Ottoman rule, its significance is far greater than any of the other wars that we were involved in. But there were probably about 100 Brits down there in Bethsheva.
Were there some dignitaries from Australia and New Zealand as well? Oh,
absolutely, yes. Obviously, for Israel, it's very important. So the Israeli Prime Minister was there, but also present was the Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. He was at these celebrations during that day. Originally, the New Zealand Prime Minister was going to be there, but they've just had an election, and so that's all changed and everything. But the Governor-General came along instead, and then there were also representatives there, obviously, from Britain. The ambassador was there, and I think there were other dignitaries there as well from other countries that represented. But it was amazing to see such a good turnout. But it's 100th year. Yeah, I mean, if you miss that, you got to wait to be another 100 years older before you can see it all again. I mean, it's amazing.
What's your prayer for the next 100 years for Israel?
Well, my prayer for the next 100 years for Israel that they will receive the Messiah that they've been waiting for and looking for, which of course we know is Jesus. Now I recognise that the eyes of the Jewish people have been blinded. They have a veil over their eyes so they cannot see this, but God is removing that veil. We see so many now who are coming to believe, so many Jews coming to believe that indeed Jesus is the Messiah, and they missed him first time round. But at some point they're going to say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And that's all Jesus wants to hear, and he'll be back.
Amen. Okay, Roy, thanks for talking.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure.